This is a BBC podcast. You can get all our podcasts and our terms of use at bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
BBC World Service. I'm Mike Williams. Welcome to The Why Factor. Today, why is it that so many of us are drawn to the ocean, to the sound of tumbling waves and the sights and the smells of the sea?
I grew up on a horse farm outside of Pretoria, 8 hours drive from the closest ocean, and I don't even remember where these thoughts of being a mermaid came from. They must have been something that filtered through fairy tales and storytelling, but growing up on a dusty horse farm in Africa, we dreamt of being mermaids.
If you watch Hanley Prinsloo at work, you can see that her dream came true. She's a free diver. With her feet strapped into a monofin like the tail of a fish, she takes a single breath and drops beneath the surface.
I try not to spend too much time away from the ocean. Both the sense of elation but also of peace that fills me when I see the sea, and this is something I've experienced both when driving from an inland area and seeing the ocean from the rise of a hill, but even in an aeroplane, actually looking down and breaking the clouds and seeing the ocean far below. It's a sense of coming home, but for me it's also a restlessness because I want to put my toes in, I want to taste the saltiness, I want to be completely enveloped in that blue expanse.
My name is Washington Ali. I'm from Zimbabwe. As you know, Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. Now I'm living by the sea as we are today. It's such a grateful thing, living by the sea, because anytime I feel like I need fresh air or I just need to rethink, I'll just come, walk along the sea, and it really refreshes my mind.
Why?
What it gives me is that therapeutic that you get from the quietness, and all you could hear is just the waves and sometimes the seagulls singing. I think it's brilliant. It's brilliant having the sea next to our doorstep.
He was asleep in a short time, and he dreamed of Africa when he was a boy, and the long golden beaches and the white beaches, so white they hurt your eyes, and the high capes and the great brown mountains.
The sea has captivated authors and poets. In ancient times, it was often described as a fearful place. But perhaps since we've stopped travelling across the oceans in vulnerable wooden boats, our attention has moved closer to the shoreline.
He lived along that coast now every night, and in his dreams he heard the surf roar and saw the native boats come riding through it. He smelled the tar and oakum of the deck as he slept, and he smelled the smell of Africa that the land breeze brought at morning.
There are a number of different ways, I think, that it can resonate in literature.
Lawrence Publicover teaches literature at Bristol University in the UK.
There's probably a distinction to be made partly between seafarers, those who actually go to sea and are challenged by it, and those who are standing on the shore looking out to sea and sort of perhaps thinking more speculatively about it. But in both respects, I think the sea is seen as a mirror in some way for us. One example of someone standing on the shore looking out to sea and seeing something within it would be Sylvia Plath in her poem 4 Fathom 5, the title taken from Shakespeare's The Tempest. And she seems to think that within the sea is locked some memory of her father.
You defy godhood. I walk dry on your kingdom's border, exiled to no good. Your shelled bed I remember. Father, this thick air is murderous. I would breathe water.
And it seems to Plath that the sea is in some way a memory of her dead father and that she feels exiled from it. And I think that's quite a common trope, actually, in literature, that although it's this alien space, the sea, somehow to go back to it is to return to something. It's quite frequently described in terms of a womb as well, that the sea is this thing that somehow we've been sort of projected out of and that we would somehow like to return to.
Our history is water. We come from 9 months in the womb. We are born into this world of sounds and smells and activity from this silent place where everything is muffled, everything is quiet. And I think when we get back into freediving or being underwater, it's an attraction that you feel immediately.
But we're We're land mammals, aren't we?
You might be a land mammal. I'm definitely not. I think there's something about being underwater that everybody can relate to. It evokes very, very strong emotions in us. We have a need to be in water.
Talk to me about the physiological responses when you dive.
The first thing that happens as soon as your face touches water, your heart rate slows down to conserve oxygen. The second thing that happens as we continue our free dive down is called vasoconstriction, which is a constricting of blood vessels in the arms and legs that flushes the blood flow back to our core for the heart to pump it past the lungs, get oxygenated to the brain. That's where we want our oxygen to be centralized. And then thirdly, our sometimes not often thought of organ called the spleen is actually a storage space for hemoglobin, for oxygen-rich red blood cells.
Hanley Prinsloo can dive down to 65 metres, hold her breath for 6 minutes. Others can go deeper and stay submerged for longer.
So these are the oxygen-conserving adaptations we have that make up the mammalian dive response that we have. And then when we dive very, very deep, we actually have a blood shift that happens where blood plasma fills out the membranes around the alveoli and cushions the lung to keep doing these deeper and deeper dives. So for me, it's simple. We belong in water.
Research shows that we value the ocean. We're willing to spend more money on a house by the sea, spend more money on a hotel room with an ocean view. But it's not obvious why we're drawn to the sea. Matt White, an environmental psychologist, is trying to find out.
We're working on 3 potential reasons. They can be summarised as evolutionary, sociocultural and individual. So the evolutionary hypothesis, and it is only a hypothesis, we've got no real concrete evidence for this, is that early humanoids didn't necessarily evolve on the open savanna plains, but they evolved in coastal communities, particularly on the east of Africa and possibly on an island. There's relatively good evidence that species evolve quicker when they're on islands because of less competition, and the speed at which hominids developed certain abilities, for example, to hold their breath and swim, which other apes can't do, kind of points and perhaps supports that evolutionary perspective.
Is there any way to tell whether we are in some way hardwired by evolution to be drawn to the sea?
We're starting to do brain scans, essentially, looking at the way blood flows around the brain in response to looking at images of coastal environments versus other natural environments and urban and built environments. What we're looking for is to see whether there are certain differences in areas of the brain that are activated when stimulated by aquatic scenes. Generally, previous research in the lab, we've shown that people prefer aquatic and water scenes, and we've also shown that partly this is due to the colour. People are drawn to the colour blue, interestingly enough. So we're having to show these images in colour and black and white to differentiate between the colour effects. And we're also having to control for people's natural preferences and liking, so that we've got very attractive urban environments and less attractive water environments to see whether it's attractiveness or whether there's some feature of water that seems to be key.
My first proper swim, the ladies who were sitting by the beach, they phoned the rescue center because they thought I'd drowned. I swam and I went so far that they couldn't see me.
Why did you swim so far?
It is the freedom of being able to swim as far as I want to go. For me, it was part of enjoying myself, enjoying the water.
The tide's coming in and my feet are getting wet.
Let's move a little bit up.
It's quite nice.
It's good. Well, I'm going to go and enjoy myself.
I wish I brought my trunks with me.
You forgot, did you?
Cold?
Nice and cool. Very refreshing. Now I'm going to go and take a dive and swim and refresh myself.
Don't go too far.
there is another possibility, which we call the sociocultural perspective. And in England is a good example. So in 1750, Dr. Richard Russell wrote a book about the possible healing mechanisms of bathing in coastal waters. And he convinced very senior people of the day, including the royal family, to come and bathe near him. Now, this is important because before that, the sea was largely a scary place. It was the place where fishermen feared for their lives, as they still do, of course. Most of the population weren't going in the sea. However, after 1750, it became fashionable almost to take the therapeutic waters. So even within the last 200, 250 years in England, there's been a sea change, sorry, excuse the pun, in the way we look at and think about the sea as a recreational, health-giving place rather than a dangerous place to travel across.
Koichi Nagasato doesn't go down to the sea to play. It's where he works. He's a fisherman and he lives in a village called Funakoshi in Japan.
I was raised by the sea, and ever since I graduated from school, I've been a fisherman. I caught tuna first and then fished on a trawler in Alaska. I suppose I'm a genuine fisherman. As for my feelings towards the sea, I wanted to raise the fish as I catch them, so to speak. I felt I shouldn't deplete resources when I fish, and I wanted to use the water without polluting it.
At 2:46 in the afternoon of the 11th of March 2011, there was an undersea earthquake off the coast of Japan. It triggered tsunami waves that grew as high as 40 metres. More than 15,000 people were killed. Nearly 3,000 went missing. And Funakoshi village, with more than 100 homes, was swept away.
At first, I didn't want to look at the sea because I was scared. But I had to go down to the shore to confirm the village's safety. As I went down, I made sure to think of an escape route for when the tsunami next hit. But all the while, I still didn't want to look at the sea. Even after a month passed, I wasn't able to face the sea. I was really afraid.
And has that changed now?
It took me a while, but I started to remember how much I love the ocean, so that's how I was able to start looking at it again. I came to the realisation that it wasn't the ocean that I was afraid of, but it was the tsunami. After that moment, I was able to look at the sea in the same way that I always have.
Why do you love the ocean?
Well, it's hard to say. I grew up with the sea, and my parents and my family have been supported by me going out to sea. So if you ask me why I love the sea, I have to say it's hard to explain, but I simply love the ocean.
And you've recently got a new boat?
Yes, I did.
Do you ever fear the sea when you're out on your boat?
When I'm on the boat, I don't fear at all because I love being on the boat. I love the sea and I love fishing.
Quite often this distinction is made between the order of the land and the chaos of the sea. And this is something that goes back certainly to the Bible, to Genesis, this idea that God created the land and the waters. He divided the waters from above the firmament from the waters below the firmament, and that the sea has remained this kind of chaotic space. For a lot of people, this means that it's deeply unattractive, that it's alien, that it's terrifying. And yes, that remains the case. And yet somehow that chaotic quality of the sea can be quite alluring. I think in a lot of Shakespearean drama, for example, you get this sense that the sea allows you to escape the tiresomeness of order, the tiresomeness of having to think about where you exist within the society, and that this chaotic space of the sea, this sort of swirling morass, is something that you'd quite like to sort of throw yourself into and drown in. You'd like to become as liquid as the space you're looking at. In Henry IV Part 2, Northumberland, hearing of his son Hotspur's death, calls for a kind of swallowing of political order.
Now, let not nature's hand keep the wild flood confined, let order die.
And similarly, Henry IV himself, towards the end of the play, calls for a kind of flood, a flooding down of the waters.
Oh God, that one might read the Book of Fate and see the revolution of the times make mountains level and the continent, weary of solid firmness, melt itself into the sea.
So in both instances, you've got this almost kind of calling together of another flood, or perhaps even a kind of reversal of the creation myth of the separation of the land from the waters, and a sort of return of chaos.
One feature particularly interesting for the sea, as opposed to other natural environments, are the sounds that the sea is associated with, from everything from crashing waves to gently lapping waters on the rocks, for example. And we've been looking at people's physiological reactions during listening to those sounds, for example, their heart rate and their blood pressure, and also their feelings and emotions. And as you might expect, we're seeing very positive reactions to aquatic soundscapes.
All of them? All aquatic soundscapes?
That's a very good question. No. In some of the early studies, we were doing direct recordings of coastal environments in the southwest of England. And what would happen would be, for example, you'd have a seagull flying in. And you'd notice increases in heart rate. So the water in general was quite nice, but it was other things around the aquatic environments which might not be so nice. Other things we found was that very large waves effectively turn into white noise. So what we tended to find was kind of babbling brooks and gentle waves seemed to be the key.
Quite refreshing. Really nice. Yeah.
It really is very...
I've really enjoyed myself.
I wish I'd brought my swimming trunks now.
Well, next time you come down, make sure you do, because you don't want to miss the excitement.
For me, and I know I'm not alone, the moving water is compelling. And two strange things happened while I was with Washington Ali on the beach at the English town of Southend-on-Sea. The recording has blank sections where we just stop talking for long periods. And instead of speaking face to face like strangers do, we both kept turning away from each other until we'd be standing side by side, staring out at the waves.
It really is very, very calming, very compelling. Maybe we should go for a little paddle.
Lovely, 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 lovely.
I did genuinely forget to bring my trunks. Sorry.
You've been listening to The Y Factor with Mike Williams talking to Hanley Prinsloo, a freediver from Cape Town in South Africa, Washington Ali from Zimbabwe and living in Southend-on-Sea in the UK, Dr. Lawrence Publicover, lecturer in English at the University of Bristol in the UK, Dr. Matt White, environmental psychologist at the University of Exeter in the UK, and Koichi Nakasato, a fisherman from Funakoshi in Japan.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.